Welcome to Wickless Night. There is something different about a night with no light at all, no candle burning, no lamp in the corner, just darkness, silence, and the feeling that something may be closer than it should be. Tonight's stories come from people who lived through moments they still cannot explain. A sound in an empty room, a stranger at the door, a shadow that moved when no one else was there. Before we step into the dark, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy slow, unsettling, true horror stories, subscribe to Wickless Night. Get comfortable. The lights are already gone. When I was around 10 years old, one of my closest friends lived in a huge old house that had once been a plantation home. From the outside, it looked old enough to have a long history. It had the kind of shape that made you imagine generations of people living there before you. The exterior had that old southern home feel, with a wide structure, large rooms, tall windows, and details that looked like they belonged to another time. But inside, it felt completely different. His parents had gutted the place and remodeled almost everything. The inside looked brand new. The floors, kitchen, fixtures, rooms, and furniture were all modern and clean. It did not feel like an old, dusty, creaking house where you expected something strange to happen. It felt like a showroom. Everything looked polished and expensive. The outside gave you history, but the inside felt fresh, bright, and new. That was part of why what happened there bothered me so much. If the house had been falling apart, I could have blamed old doors, loose windows, bad wiring, or floorboards shifting. If it had been a dark, neglected place, I could have told myself that the setting had scared us more than anything else. But this house was renovated. It was not some abandoned building. It was not a rundown place with warped floors and broken fixtures. His parents had put a lot of work into it. They had modernized it completely, and it looked like a newer home once you were inside. I spent a lot of time there. I was at my friend's house often enough that I knew the layout well. I knew where the kitchen was, where the bedrooms were, where the television room was, and where the dog usually stayed. I knew the stairs, the hallway, and the way the house sounded when people moved around. Nothing about it usually scared me. One night, his parents went out for a date night. I do not remember the exact time they left, but it was probably around 8 in the evening. They told us they would be gone for a while, and we were supposed to stay inside, behave, and not destroy anything. His older brother and sister were not home either, at least not when his parents left, so it was just me and my friend in the house. At 10 years old, that felt exciting. We were old enough to know we had rules, but young enough to think being left alone in a big house was an adventure. We had snacks, video games, television, and no adults walking in every few minutes telling us to turn something down or stop arguing over the controller. We went upstairs to his room and started playing video games. I do not remember the game. It was probably something we had played 100 times before. The exact game did not matter. What mattered was that we were completely focused on it. We were laughing, talking, competing, and doing what kids do when they are trying to ignore the fact that they should probably be getting tired. The house was quiet beneath us. At first, that was normal. His parents had only been gone for about an hour. The dog was downstairs in his kennel in the sunroom. The house alarm had been set when his parents left, which gave us some comfort. Even as kids, we understood that. The doors were locked, the alarm was on, and nobody should be able to come inside without it making noise. Then we heard something downstairs. It was not a clear sound at first, just a noise. Maybe a creak, maybe something moving, maybe a door closing somewhere below us. I do not remember exactly because it did not seem terrifying right away. Our first thought was that his older brother or sister had come home. That was the obvious explanation. Maybe one of them had their own key. Maybe they had come in quietly. Maybe they were downstairs getting food or heading to their room. We had stopped paying close attention to the time, so it was completely possible that someone had returned home. We paused the game. My friend looked at me, and I looked at him. "Was that your brother?" I asked. "Or something close to that?" He shrugged. We listened again. There was another sound downstairs. At that point, we both decided to go check. The staircase in the house was one of those stairwells that made a 90-degree turn. You would start going down, reach a landing or turn, then continue toward the bottom. From upstairs, you could not see the whole lower floor. You had to go down far enough and turn the corner before the kitchen came into view. We walked down together. Neither of us was especially scared yet. We were more curious than anything. We expected to see one of his siblings in the kitchen, maybe opening the refrigerator or talking on the phone. As we came around the turn in the stairs, we could see across the large kitchen. The kitchen was one of the biggest rooms in the house. It had a huge island in the middle, modern cabinets, hanging cookware above the island, and enough open space that you could see directly across it. At the far side of the kitchen was a door leading into the sunroom or TV room. That room had the dog's kennel in it. The door to that room had a large pane of glass built into it. When we first looked down, the door was almost closed. I remember that clearly. It was not fully shut. It was resting close to the frame, maybe only a little open. The room beyond it was dim. We could see the outline of the sunroom, but not much else. Then, without warning, the door slammed open. Not slowly, not like it had been pushed by a light breeze. It flew from nearly closed to completely open in one violent motion, and hit the wall hard enough that the large glass pane in the door shattered. The sound was enormous. The door hit the wall. The glass exploded. Pieces went everywhere. For 1 second, we stood completely still, because neither of us understood what had just happened. Then we ran. We ran back upstairs as fast as we could. I do not remember deciding to run. It was automatic. One moment we were staring at the shattered glass. The next we were racing up the stairs, taking steps 2 at a time, trying to get as far from the kitchen as possible. We got into my friend's bedroom and locked the door. Then we just stood there. Both of us were breathing hard. The video game was still paused on the screen. The room was lit, warm, and familiar, but it did not help much. The sound of the glass breaking was still stuck in my head. I could still picture the door flying open. We started arguing about what could have happened. I thought it might have been a burglar. That was the first thing my mind went to. Maybe someone had gotten into the house. Maybe someone had come through a door or window without us hearing them. Maybe someone was downstairs right now. My friend thought it had to be his parents or siblings messing with us. That was the explanation he wanted, because it was easier. Maybe his brother had come in and thought it would be funny to scare us. Maybe his sister was downstairs. Maybe his parents had come back early and were trying to play a joke. But that explanation did not make much sense either. His parents had set the house alarm when they left. If someone had come in through the front door, the back door, or one of the windows, the alarm should have gone off. We never heard it. We never heard any kind of warning tone, siren, or alert. The house had remained quiet until that door slammed open. We called his parents. I remember my friend speaking first, trying to explain what happened without sounding like we had destroyed something. He asked whether they had come home. He asked whether one of the older siblings had come back. They said no. It was not them. It was not his brother. It was not his sister. Nobody had returned to the house. Then we told them about the glass door. At first, they thought we were lying or hiding something. That is understandable. 2 10-year-old boys alone in a house, a broken glass door, and a story about it slamming open by itself? It sounds like the kind of excuse kids make after wrestling or playing around indoors. They probably assumed we had been horsing around. Maybe they thought we had kicked a ball, thrown something, slammed the door too hard, or accidentally broken it while messing about. They told us they would be home soon. So we stayed upstairs. For a while we did not move. We kept listening for sounds from downstairs. Every little creak made us look at each other. The house had seemed normal when we came in. Now it felt huge. The hallway outside the bedroom seemed too quiet. The stairs seemed too far away. We were both wondering whether someone was downstairs, whether something else would break, or whether we would get in trouble the second his parents walked in. Eventually, curiosity took over. We were still scared, but we wanted to see what the kitchen looked like. We wanted to know whether there was any obvious reason the door had broken. So we opened the bedroom door and went downstairs again. This time, we moved slowly. The staircase felt different now. We kept close together. Neither of us wanted to be the one in front. We went down the first part of the stairs, turned the corner, and looked into the kitchen. Glass was everywhere. It was not just around the door. There were pieces across the kitchen floor, scattered out from the sunroom entrance. There was glass near the island. There was glass near the bottom of the stairwell. Some pieces had clearly flown farther than they should have if the glass had simply cracked and fallen straight down. The door was open against the wall. The sunroom beyond it was dark. The dog was in his kennel. At first, he was quiet. Then my friend said we should clean the glass before someone got hurt. It made sense. His parents were coming home. If they walked into the kitchen in the dark, they could step on something. The dog could get out and cut his paws. One of us could step wrong and get glass in our feet. My friend went to get a broom. I stayed nearby, watching the sunroom door. I remember feeling like I did not want to go close to it. But we had to. There was glass near the doorway, and the dog's kennel was inside the sunroom. We started sweeping carefully. At first, the dog stayed in his kennel. He was an older yellow lab. I had known that dog for a long time. I had been at the house plenty of times, and he had always been friendly. He was the kind of dog that liked people, wagged his tail, and acted happy when he saw familiar faces. I had never heard him growl. Not once. Then, as we got closer to the sunroom door to sweep the glass near the entrance, he started low growling at us. It was not a bark. It was a deep, quiet growl. The kind that starts low in a dog's chest and makes you stop moving without even thinking about it. I looked at my friend. He looked at the dog. The dog was staring past us. That was the part that got to me. He was not staring at the broom. He was not staring at us as though he was upset we were near his kennel. He seemed to be looking through or past us toward the kitchen. His body was stiff. His ears looked different. The growl became more serious. I asked my friend if the dog usually did that. My friend shook his head. He said he had only ever heard the dog growl at a cat or another dog. He had never heard him growl at people, especially not at us. We were familiar. I was at the house all the time. There was no reason for the dog to be afraid of us. We stood there for a second, not knowing what to do. Then something crashed above us. A cast iron skillet fell from the hanging rack over the large kitchen island. It hit the floor with a sound so loud it felt like the whole house shook. Then a small pot fell too. The 2 pieces of cookware hit the floor one after another, bouncing and clanging against the tile or wood. The noise filled the kitchen. It was sharp, heavy, and impossible to ignore. Neither of us touched the island. Nobody was standing near it. There were no cats loose in the house. There were no other animals running around. The doors and windows were closed. The skillet and pot had been hanging in place before. Then, without warning, they fell. We did not stay to investigate. We ran again. We ran upstairs, slammed the bedroom door, and locked it. This time, neither of us tried to explain it away. We were both equally scared. The door breaking had been frightening, but there were still possible explanations. A draft, a broken hinge, pressure from a heating system, a loose latch, maybe something structural. It seemed unlikely, but it was possible. The dog growling was harder to explain. The pots falling were harder still. There had been no one in the kitchen. There had been no animal near the island. We had not bumped it. We had not touched the rack. We had been several feet away, and the dog had been growling towards something we could not see. We stayed in the bedroom for the rest of the time. I remember sitting there feeling sick with fear. I wanted to go home. I did not care if my parents were annoyed. I did not care if I looked like a baby. I did not want to be in that house anymore. I called my parents and asked them to come get me. I told them something had happened. I probably could not explain it well because I was 10 years old and scared out of my mind. I just knew I wanted out. My friend said he wanted to come with me. That made me feel better in one way because I knew I was not the only person who was afraid. But it also made the whole thing feel more real. If he had laughed at me, I might have convinced myself I was overreacting. He did not laugh. He was just as scared. His parents came home before mine arrived. At first, they immediately blamed us. They saw the broken glass, the fallen cookware, and 2 scared kids upstairs. From their point of view, it probably looked obvious. We had been left alone. Something in the kitchen had broken. The easiest answer was that we had been playing around and damaged things. They started asking what we had done. Had we been wrestling? Had we been throwing things? Had we slammed the door? Had we tried to open it too hard? Did we knock the pots down? But once we started explaining what happened, their reaction changed. I do not remember exactly what they said. I remember them looking at us. I remember that they could see we were not pretending. We were not trying to come up with a clever excuse. We were scared in a way that 10-year-olds are not good at faking for long. We told them the door had slammed open by itself. We told them the glass shattered. We told them the alarm had never gone off. We told them the dog started growling. We told them the skillet and pot fell while we were standing away from the island. We told them there was nobody else in the house. I do not know whether they fully believed us. Maybe they still thought there had to be an ordinary cause. Maybe they thought the door was damaged, the rack was loose, and the dog was reacting to the noise and stress. Maybe they assumed we had not seen something correctly. Those explanations are possible. A door can slam if the pressure changes in a house. A latch can fail. A glass panel can break if the door hits hard enough. Hanging cookware can fall if a hook is loose, if the rack shifts, or if the impact from the door shaking the wall causes something to move. The dog might have growled because he was frightened by the broken glass and loud noise. He might have sensed our fear. Dogs react to tension. If 2 kids are nervous and moving carefully around a room, a dog may become alert or defensive. There may have been a normal explanation for every piece. But as a kid, none of it felt normal. The door was almost closed, then flew open hard enough to smash the glass. The house alarm never sounded. The dog growled at something that was not us. Then heavy cookware fell from above us, all within a short period of time. I never stayed at that house again after that night. I still saw my friend at school. We were still friends. I still went places with him, but I did not sleep over at his house again. I did not want to sit in that kitchen. I did not want to go down those stairs after dark. I did not want to look toward the sunroom door. The house had been beautiful. It had been clean and modern inside. It had felt new. But after that night, I could not think of it as a normal house anymore. I do not know what happened. I cannot say there was definitely something supernatural in that house. I cannot prove that a spirit, ghost, or anything else caused the door to move or the cookware to fall. Maybe it was all bad timing. Maybe the door hardware failed at the exact moment we walked downstairs. Maybe the glass shattered because of the force of the impact. Maybe the dog was frightened. Maybe the hanging rack was already unstable. Maybe the fear made every later sound feel connected to the first. That could be true. But I still remember the way the door flew open. I still remember the sound of the glass hitting the floor. I still remember how quiet the house was before it happened. And I still remember that low growl from the yellow lab, a sound neither of us had ever heard from him before. Even now, thinking about it gives me goosebumps. It was the only time I have ever experienced something like that. And whatever happened that night, it did not feel friendly. My grandparents' old house had always been known in the family as a haunted house. That was not just something one person said after a bad dream. There were several stories connected to that house, most of them told by different relatives at different times. Some people had heard sounds, some had felt uncomfortable in certain rooms, some had seen things they could not explain. I did not personally experience every story, but I grew up knowing that the house had a reputation. It was one of those old family homes that seemed to carry its own atmosphere. During the day, it looked normal enough. It had the usual rooms, familiar furniture, family photos, plants, and all the signs of a house where people had lived for a long time. There was nothing obviously frightening about it. It was not abandoned or broken down. It was simply old, lived in, and full of history. But at night, or when the house became quiet, people seemed to notice things more. A hallway could feel darker than it should have. A room could feel colder even when the heat was on. Someone could swear they heard a person move through another part of the house, only to find everyone sitting still in the living room. There were always explanations people could offer. Old houses make noises, pipes knock, floors settle. Wind comes through gaps around windows. A shadow from a car outside can move across a wall and look like a person for a second. But some things in that house did not feel so easy to dismiss. The most important part of this story was the dining room. There was a corner space in that room that the family dogs refused to lie in. My grandparents had dogs for years. Different dogs, different personalities, different ages. Some were lazy and would sleep anywhere. Some followed people from room to room. Some liked warm patches of sunlight. Some would curl up under tables, near chairs, beside the sofa, or wherever they felt comfortable. But none of them wanted to settle in that one corner. It was not a big dramatic thing at first. Nobody watched the dogs enter the dining room and run out crying. They did not bark constantly at the walls. They did not act possessed or anything like that. They simply avoided that spot. The corner was near some potted fig trees that my grandparents kept in the dining room. The trees were large enough to be noticeable, with leaves spreading out over part of the room. The pots sat in that area because there was decent light and enough space for them. The dogs would walk around the trees. They would sniff near the area sometimes, but they would not lie down there. If someone put a dog bed close to that corner, the dog would choose somewhere else. If the rest of the room was empty, a dog might still choose the hallway or the living room instead of settling near those plants. It did not matter which dog it was. They all seemed to have the same instinct about that part of the house. My family noticed it. At first, it became one of those strange little details people mention in passing. The dogs never liked that corner. Look, he won't go near the fig tree again. Why does she keep sleeping on the other side of the room? It was unsettling, but it was not enough on its own to prove anything. Animals have preferences. They may dislike a draft, a smell, a sound people cannot hear, or a certain part of the floor. A dog may avoid a place because it is colder, warmer, noisier, or uncomfortable for reasons that are not obvious. Still, the dog's behavior fit too well with the other stories people had told about the house. Over time, that corner became known in our family as the haunted corner. When my grandparents eventually decided to move out of the house, they had to figure out what to do with everything. There were boxes, furniture, old dishes, family photographs, plants, and all the ordinary things that build up over years of living in one place. Moving out of an old home is always strange. You are not only packing objects, you are packing memories, routines, smells, and familiar parts of your life. Among the things my grandparents decided to give away was one of the fig trees. It was the fig tree that had been sitting in the corner the dogs avoided. My family ended up taking it. At the time, nobody made a huge deal out of it. It was a healthy-looking plant, and plants are easy gifts to accept. A large fig tree can make a room feel alive. It fills a corner, adds color, and gives a house a warmer feeling. So we brought it home. We found a place for it in our house. At first, nothing happened. The tree just sat there. It had leaves, a pot, soil, and the normal smell of a houseplant. It looked completely harmless. There was no obvious reason to think it carried anything strange with it, and I do not think anyone in my family expected it to. But fairly soon after the tree came into our house, my mom started seeing something. She would be sitting in the living room and catch a figure moving from the hallway toward the kitchen. At first, she probably assumed it was one of us. That is the normal thing to assume when you see movement in the corner of your eye. You think someone has walked by. You think your child is going to get a drink. You think your partner is heading into the kitchen. You think it is a shadow from the television or a change in light. But then she would look again. Nobody would be there. The hallway would be empty. The kitchen would be empty. Everyone who should have been walking around would be sitting somewhere else. She did not tell everyone immediately. I think she kept it to herself for a while, because it sounds strange when you say it out loud. I keep seeing someone walk down the hallway is the kind of thing people may laugh at or try to explain away quickly. But she continued seeing it. It was always similar. A person-shaped figure moving from the hallway toward the kitchen. Not standing still, not looking directly at her, just walking past. A quick movement at the edge of her vision, enough to make her glance toward the hall. Then, nothing. After about a month, I started seeing it too. I remember the first time clearly enough that it has stayed with me. I was sitting in the living room. The house was normal. There was probably television noise, conversation, or some ordinary family activity going on. I was not alone in a dark room. I was not trying to look for something strange. Then I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Someone appeared to be walking from the hallway toward the kitchen. My first thought was that it was my mom. That made perfect sense. She was often in the house. She moved around. She went into the kitchen. There was nothing strange about seeing her in that direction. But when I turned to look, nobody was there. The hallway was empty. The kitchen entrance was empty. I looked back toward the living room and realized my mom was still sitting there. That was the first moment I felt genuinely unsettled. It is one thing to see a vague shadow. It is another to mistake something for a person you know, then realize that person has not moved. The first time I saw it, I could make out a small amount of detail. Not a clear face. Not enough to identify anyone. But I remember the impression of a woman. She seemed to be wearing something light blue. It could have been a dress, a shirt, a robe, or simply a pale blue shape that my mind turned into clothing. I cannot say for certain. The figure was never clear enough to study. It was always seen in motion, always briefly, always from the corner of the eye. But the light blue color stayed with me. It was enough to make the figure feel more real than a shadow. After that, the sightings continued. For more than a year, my mom and I would both catch sight of the figure walking down the hallway toward the kitchen. We never saw it at the same time. That is important. There was never a moment where we both looked up together and saw a fully visible woman standing in the hall. We never had proof. We never took a photo. We never pointed at the same thing and agreed on every detail. It was always one person seeing it separately. My mom would be sitting in the living room and suddenly look toward the hallway. Then she would say, "I thought that was you." Or I would glance toward the kitchen and ask, "Did you just walk by?" Then we would realize that neither of us had moved. There were times when I was convinced it was my mom walking into the kitchen. I would see the movement, the shape, the light-colored clothing, and automatically think she had gotten up. Then I would turn around and find both my parents still in another room talking. That was the worst part. Your brain expects a person to be there. You see the motion. You recognize the outline as someone familiar. Then reality does not match what you just saw. For a second, it makes you question yourself. Did I really see someone? Did I only see a reflection? Was it the television flashing against the wall? Did a car pass outside? Did a curtain move? Was I tired? But the figure kept appearing in the same general path. Hallway to kitchen. Hallway to kitchen. Always fast enough that by the time you looked directly, it was gone. The house did not have anyone else living there. It was only our family. There was no roommate who could have been walking around. No neighbor with a key. No hidden part of the house where someone could disappear. No person regularly coming in and out without our knowledge. Neither my mom nor I had any reason to think we were experiencing ongoing hallucinations or anything like that. We were functioning normally. We worked, talked, watched television, went about our lives, and did not see things everywhere we went. It was limited to the house. More specifically, it seemed connected to that hallway. And it began after the fig tree came from my grandparents' old dining room. That connection was impossible to ignore. The tree had sat in the one corner the dogs refused to lie in. Then it came to our home. Then my mom started seeing the woman-shaped figure walking down the hall. Then I started seeing her too. It did not prove the tree caused anything. I know that. A plant is just a plant. It has roots, soil, leaves, and a pot. It cannot carry a ghost in any way that can be demonstrated. The human mind is very good at building stories around objects, especially objects from places that already have creepy histories. Maybe we were influenced by what we knew about my grandparents' house. Maybe my mom saw a shadow, then started paying more attention to the hallway. Maybe I heard her mention it and began noticing similar things. Maybe the tree became a symbol of the old house, and our minds connected ordinary movements and reflections to it. That is possible, but for more than a year, the sightings continued, and each one made us jump. Even when we were expecting it, it still startled us. You never get used to seeing what looks like someone walking through your house when you know nobody is supposed to be there. Sometimes the figure appeared when the house was bright. Sometimes it appeared in the evening. Sometimes there was a lamp on nearby. Sometimes only the television. The lighting did not seem to matter much. What stayed consistent was the direction. The figure came from the hallway and moved toward the kitchen. It never came from the kitchen toward the hallway. It never appeared in the bedrooms. It never stood still in the middle of the room. It never spoke. It never touched anything. It was just a woman-shaped presence passing through the same path again and again. That made it oddly sad as well as frightening. If it had been aggressive, it might have been easier to define. We could have said something was trying to scare us. We could have said the house was dangerous. But the figure did not seem to react to us. It did not turn toward us or chase us. It did not do anything that felt directly threatening. It simply walked, or seemed to walk. Maybe it was only a pattern our eyes created. Maybe the hallway, the kitchen lighting, and the shape of the fig tree made reflections that looked like movement. Maybe a shadow passed across the wall in a way that fooled us repeatedly. Maybe our brains filled in the rest, because humans are built to recognize people, especially in peripheral vision. But it was difficult to believe that explanation every time it happened. The figure felt too specific, the movement was too familiar, and the light blue detail was hard to forget. Eventually, we had to give the fig tree back to my grandparents. It was not because we were terrified of it or decided it was cursed. The reason was much more ordinary. Our house did not have enough proper lighting for it. The tree needed more light than we could give it. It was not thriving the way it should have. The leaves were not doing as well, and we did not want to keep it somewhere it could not be cared for properly. So we returned it. The day we took it out of the house, I remember feeling strange about it. It was only a plant, but it had become connected in our minds to the sightings. We had brought it in from the haunted corner of my grandparents' dining room. Then the woman had started appearing in our hallway. Now we were taking the tree away. Part of me wondered whether anything would change. After the fig tree was returned, the sightings stopped. Not instantly in a dramatic way. There was no final appearance, no voice, no sudden sign that something had left the house. The figure simply stopped showing up as often. Then it stopped showing up at all. I think I saw it once or twice after the tree was gone, but that was it. After that, nothing. The hallway became just a hallway again. The kitchen became just a kitchen. My mom and I stopped mistaking a moving figure for each other. We stopped glancing toward the hall every time we saw motion in the corner of our eyes. The house felt normal. That is what made the entire thing feel even stranger. For over a year, my mom and I had been seeing the same kind of figure in the same part of the house. We did not see it together, but we both described the same general movement. It began after the fig tree arrived. It faded after the fig tree left. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe the plant had changed the light in the room somehow. A large tree can create shadows. Its leaves can move slightly in air currents. A shape in a room can alter how light reflects from windows, lamps, or the television. Maybe the tree caused a visual effect that looked like a person moving from the hallway to the kitchen. Maybe the effect disappeared when the tree was gone. That is one possible explanation. Maybe the reason the dogs avoided the corner at my grandparents' house had nothing to do with anything strange. Maybe there was a sound or smell humans could not notice. Maybe the floor was colder. Maybe the plants had a scent the dogs disliked. Maybe that one corner was simply uncomfortable for reasons nobody understood. That is possible too. But even now, it is hard not to connect the details. The dogs avoided the corner. The fig tree came from that corner. The tree entered our house. Then a woman in light blue started walking through our hallway. The tree left, and the woman was gone. I do not know what to believe. I do not say for sure that the plant carried a ghost. I do not know how that could be true. I do not know whether the figure was a spirit, a shadow, a trick of peripheral vision, or something created by stress and expectation. But I know what it felt like. I know how many times I saw movement and assumed it was my mom. I know the shock of turning around and finding her still talking in another room. I know how my mom would look toward the hallway with the same startled expression, then say she thought it was me. And I know how quiet the house became after we gave the fig tree back. The fact that it stopped is the part I still cannot explain. Maybe the answer is simple, and I just do not know it. Maybe there was never anything in the house at all. But every now and then, I still think about that woman in light blue walking down the hallway, always moving toward the kitchen, always disappearing before either of us could look straight at her. And I still wonder whether she came with the tree from the corner where the dogs never wanted to sleep. When I was a kid, I had a mirror in my room that was supposed to be mounted on the wall. It was not a tiny mirror you could pick up with one hand and move around easily. It was a decent-sized mirror, heavy enough that it felt solid when you lifted it. I would guess it weighed at least 10 pounds, maybe more. It had been made to hang properly on the wall, but at some point, the brackets were lost. So instead of mounting it, we leaned it against the wall. That was not unusual in our house. People do that with mirrors, picture frames, shelves, and all kinds of things when they do not have the right hardware or do not feel like dealing with installation right away. The mirror sat at a slight angle, with the bottom resting on the floor and the top leaning back against the wall. It had been there long enough that I did not think much about it. It was just part of my room. I would pass it every day. I would see myself in it when I walked by. I would glance at it while getting dressed, checking my hair, or leaving the room. Sometimes the reflection made the room look bigger. Sometimes it caught light from the window or the hallway, but it was not something I considered dangerous. It leaned there. It stayed there. Nothing happened. Then one night, it fell forward, not slowly, not like it slipped a few inches and finally tipped over. It somehow came forward hard enough to hit the floor. I remember the sound first, a heavy, sharp crash that made me jump immediately. When a large mirror falls, it does not sound like a book sliding off a shelf or a small picture frame falling from a wall. It sounds violent. Glass, wood, weight, and impact all at once. The sound filled the room. For a second, I did not understand what had happened. Then I realized the mirror was no longer against the wall. It was on the floor. I remember staring at it and trying to figure out how it had fallen in that direction. That was the part that bothered me. A mirror leaning against a wall should normally fall backward toward the wall if something pushes it from the front. Or it might slide down slowly if the bottom shifts. But this one had fallen forward, away from the wall. It looked as though something had pulled it, or pushed it from behind. Of course, that does not mean something actually did. There are plenty of ways objects can fall that do not look obvious afterward. The bottom may have shifted, the wall may not have been level, the frame may have warped, the mirror may have been leaning at a slightly different angle than I remembered. A vibration somewhere in the house may have made it move slowly until it reached the point where gravity took over. But at the time, none of those explanations occurred to me. I was a kid. I saw a heavy mirror that had always leaned safely against the wall suddenly lying face forward on the floor, and I immediately felt uneasy. The mirror had not been balanced in some precarious way that I knew of. It was not sitting on a wobbly table. It was not resting on a rug that could easily slide. It was against the wall, in the same place it had been for a long time. And then, somehow, it had fallen forward. I remember thinking that it should not have happened. Afterward, people tried to give me explanations. The first explanation was the door. The mirror was positioned behind my bedroom door, or close enough to it that people assumed the door may have hit it. The idea was that when I opened the door might have pushed the mirror backward, changing its angle. Then later, When the door moved again or the mirror settled, it could have tipped forward. That sounded reasonable at first. Doors can move things. A door swinging open can bump furniture. It can press against objects behind it. It can shift a frame enough that the object becomes unstable. But I did not want to just accept that explanation without checking. So I tested it. I placed the mirror back where it had been, behind the door, in roughly the same position. Then I opened the door. At first, I opened it normally. The door barely touched the mirror. It did not shove it hard. It did not push it far back against the wall. It only made the lightest contact, if any. The door did not swing into the mirror with enough force to change its angle dramatically. Then I tried harder. I swung the door open as hard as I could. I did it multiple times. I opened it fast. I opened it forcefully. I tried to recreate the kind of impact people were suggesting might have happened. The door still barely touched the mirror. It hardly even poked it. And that was with me actively trying to make it happen. On the night the mirror fell, I had not been swinging the door open that hard. I was not slamming it. I was not running into the room and throwing the door wide open. I was a kid going in and out of my bedroom, normally. There was also a doorstop in place. The knob was not supposed to slam into the wall. The door could only open so far before the stopper stopped it. That meant the door did not have unlimited force or space to swing back and shove the mirror around. The more I tested it, the less the door explanation made sense to me. Maybe the door had touched the mirror at some point. Maybe it had nudged it slightly. But I could not get it to move in any significant way, even when I opened the door much harder than I normally would. It did not explain why the mirror had fallen forward. It did not explain how a small tap from a door could create enough force for a heavy mirror to crash face first onto the floor. The next explanation people gave me was the air conditioning. Maybe the AC had turned on. Maybe there had been a strong gust of air from the vent or fan. Maybe it moved the mirror enough to make it fall. That explanation sounded even less likely to me. This was not a lightweight piece of cardboard propped against the wall. It was a heavy mirror. It had a thick frame. It rested on the floor. It was leaning against the wall with its own weight holding it in place. For the act to knock it forward, the air would have needed to be incredibly strong. Not just enough to make a curtain flutter, not just enough to move a piece of paper or make a door creak. It would have had to be a powerful gust, strong enough to push a 10-pound mirror out from its resting position and make it tip over. The air conditioning in that room did not do that. The fan did not blast like a wind tunnel. It did not make furniture shift. It did not knock things over. It was just normal household airflow. So I could not really accept that explanation either. I am not saying the mirror definitely fell because of something supernatural. I know that is not the only possibility. Maybe the frame had been slowly shifting against the wall for days or weeks. Maybe the floor was slightly uneven. Maybe the bottom of the mirror had been resting on something that finally moved. Maybe a vibration from footsteps, plumbing, a closing door somewhere else in the house, or the heating system caused the final shift. Maybe the mirror had been unstable the whole time, and I simply did not realize it. That is probably the most logical answer. Heavy objects can seem stable until they suddenly are not. Something can sit in the same position for months and then fall, because a tiny change in angle finally pushes it past a tipping point. But the reason it stayed with me was because I tried to recreate the most obvious explanations afterward. I tried the door. I tried it gently. I tried it hard. I tried swinging it open as fast and forcefully as I could. It barely made contact with the mirror. Then I thought about the AC. I thought about how much force would be needed to knock that mirror over, and I could not imagine the vent doing it. The mirror was not fragile in the sense that it looked delicate. It was solid. Heavy, the kind of object that you expected to stay where it was unless someone physically moved it. When it hit the ground, it did not just make me nervous because of the noise. It made me feel like something had happened in the room while I was not looking. The mirror had been standing there. Then it was on the floor, and the direction it fell did not make sense to me. I remember checking the frame afterward. I remember looking at the wall. I remember looking at the floor around it. I wanted to find something obvious. A loose object under the bottom edge. A damaged part of the frame. A bump in the carpet. A crack in the wall. Anything that could make me say, okay, that was it. But I did not find a clear answer. That is the annoying thing about unexplained events. You do not need to believe in ghosts to feel unsettled by them. You can be completely practical and still be bothered when something happens that does not fit the explanation people give you. A mirror falling is not impossible. Mirrors fall all the time. But a heavy mirror leaning against a wall and falling forward without a clear push is the kind of thing that makes you replay the room in your mind. You start thinking about where you were, what time it was, whether anyone else was home, whether you had opened the door earlier, whether the act was running, whether the floor had shaken, whether you heard anything before the crash. And then, after enough time passes, all you are left with is the sound. That sudden, heavy impact, the image of the mirror lying face down on the floor, and the feeling that it should not have fallen that way. I have thought about the direction of the fall more than anything else. If it had fallen backward, I would not have cared much. Mirrors lean too far, lose balance, and slide against the wall. That would be normal. If it had slipped sideways, I would have blamed the floor. If the door had visibly struck it and knocked it over, I would have accepted that. But it fell forward, away from the wall. That is what made it feel like someone had pushed it. Of course, objects can tip forward naturally. If the bottom edge moves slightly away from the wall, even a small amount, the center of gravity changes. Once it passes a certain point, the weight of the mirror carries it down. It does not need a huge force in that exact moment. The movement could have started earlier and gone unnoticed. That is probably what happened. But then, I remember the tests. I remember the door barely reaching it. I remember the doorstop preventing the door from swinging much farther. I remember opening the door hard enough that I was almost trying to prove the explanation right, and it still did not move the mirror the way people said it might have. After the mirror fell, I did not leave it leaning against the wall in the same way again. Even if I did not fully believe anything strange had happened, I did not trust it anymore. I did not want to be sitting nearby if it fell again. I did not want to wake up to another crash. I did not want to walk past it and wonder whether it was going to come forward. There is something unsettling about mirrors anyway. They are normal objects, but they can feel strange in dark rooms. They reflect movement behind you. They catch light in unexpected ways. They turn familiar spaces into reversed versions of themselves. As a kid, a mirror leaning against a wall already had a strange presence in a room. After it fell, it became something I noticed constantly. I would look at it and wonder whether it was stable. I would check how far the bottom rested from the wall. I would look at the angle. I would think about the crash. Maybe that is all it was in the end, a poorly supported mirror that finally lost its balance. Maybe no one pushed it. Maybe no gust of air was needed. Maybe the floor shifted, the frame settled, or some tiny movement changed the angle enough to make gravity do the rest. But I still do not feel like the explanations I was given fully fit. The door explanation did not work when I tested it. The air conditioning explanation did not seem strong enough. And I never found anything else that explained why it suddenly fell forward after staying there for so long. I do not know whether it was paranormal. I do not know whether it was just physics that I did not understand at the time. But I know that when it happened, it scared me. It scared me because it was heavy. It scared me because it was close to where I slept. And it scared me because, in my mind, it looked like something had reached out from behind it and shoved it into the room. Even now, I think of that mirror whenever someone says, "It was probably the door," or "It was probably the act." Maybe they are right. But I tried both explanations afterward, and neither one could make that heavy mirror fall the way it did that night. When I was little, maybe around 8 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night because I needed to use the bathroom. I do not remember what time it was. I only remember that the whole house was quiet, in the way houses are quiet when everyone else is asleep. There were no voices, no television sounds, no lights on in the hallway, and no movement coming from the other rooms. I remember waking up in my bed and feeling that strange nighttime confusion children get sometimes. You are awake enough to know where you are, but not awake enough to feel fully alert. The room is familiar, but the darkness changes it. The shapes of furniture look different. The corners seem deeper. A chair with clothes on it can look like a person for a second. The house seems larger because everyone is asleep, and you are the only one moving through it. I got out of bed and went to pee. That part of the night is completely normal in my memory. I remember walking to the bathroom, using it, and then heading back toward my room. I do not remember being afraid at that point. I do not remember hearing anything strange. I was just a kid getting up in the night and trying to get back into bed before I became too awake. The hallway was dark. There may have been a little light coming from outside through a window, or maybe there was some faint glow from another part of the house. I do not remember needing to turn on a light. I knew the route well enough to get back to my room without one. When I came back into my bedroom, I saw a figure. It looked like a woman. The figure was on its knees beside my desk chair, facing toward the chair as though it was writing on something placed there. At first, I did not scream. I did not run. I did not feel the kind of sudden terror that people usually describe when they see something strange in their room at night. I just stood there. The figure looked real enough that my brain did not immediately treat it like a dream. It did not look like a vague shadow or a trick of the light. It looked like a person in my room, kneeling down and focused on something. The desk chair had something on it, or at least it seemed to. I do not know whether there was actually paper, a notebook, or some other object there. In the memory, it feels like she was writing on something resting on the chair, as though the chair had become a small table. She was bent over slightly. Her attention was completely on whatever she was doing. She did not seem to notice me at first. Or maybe she knew I was there, but did not react. That is one of the things I still do not understand. If I had walked into my room and seen an ordinary person kneeling beside my desk, I would have expected them to look up immediately. Anyone would. A person would hear a child entering the room. They would turn their head. They would say something. They would ask what I was doing awake. But this figure did not seem to behave like that. She was simply there, quietly kneeling beside the chair. Writing. The strange part was that she had a red border around her. Not a bright red light like a lamp or a glow filling the room. It was more like an outline around her body. A thin red edge, or a reddish glow that separated her from the darkness of the room. I do not know how else to explain it. It looked as though the air around her had a different color, like she was outlined in red. The room itself was dark, but the figure stood out because of that border. It was not sharp enough to look like a cartoon or a drawing. It did not seem fake. It just made her presence clearer. Even now, when I think about it, the red outline is one of the strongest details. The woman was not threatening. That is important. She did not look angry. She did not move toward me. She did not say my name. She did not make a strange sound. She did not stare at me from the corner of the room. She did not seem like something that wanted to scare me. If anything, the feeling I had was the opposite. I felt calm. Protected, that is a strange thing to say about seeing an unknown figure in your bedroom at night, but it is true. I remember being confused, but I do not remember being terrified. I remember the figure feeling gentle somehow. There was something quiet about her, something steady. She did not bring the feeling of danger that you would expect from an unfamiliar person suddenly appearing in a child's room. She felt like she belonged there, even though she obviously did not. I stood there and watched her. I do not know how long. It may have been only a few seconds. It may have been longer. Childhood memories do not always keep time accurately. A moment can feel long when something unusual is happening, especially when you are tired and standing in a dark room. I remember the scene as though it was still in front of me. My desk, the chair, the woman kneeling near it, the red outline around her, the sense that she was writing something down. But after that, the memory becomes blank. I do not remember what happened next. I do not remember whether I walked back to bed. I do not remember whether I called for my parents. I do not remember waking my brother. I do not remember turning on the light. I do not remember asking the woman who she was. I do not remember her disappearing. There is just nothing after that moment. It is as though my memory ends while I am still standing in the doorway of my room. That is part of why I have always wondered whether it was a dream. It would make sense if it was a dream. I was 8 years old. I had just woken up in the middle of the night. I was sleepy. I had walked to the bathroom and returned to bed. Maybe I was still partly dreaming. Maybe I saw a dream image layered over my real room. Maybe my brain created the figure in the same way dreams can create places that look familiar but feel slightly wrong. That would explain why I do not remember what happened afterward. Maybe I went straight back to bed and forgot everything except the strongest image. Maybe I dreamed the whole scene in the short time between using the bathroom and falling asleep again. Maybe I woke up later in the morning with only a fragment of the dream stuck in my mind. That is possible. But it has never felt like a dream to me. It feels like a memory. There is a difference, at least in the way it sits in my mind. Most dreams are strange in a loose way. They change. They skip from place to place. People appear and disappear. You may remember a feeling, but the details shift every time you think about them. A dream can feel vivid when you first wake up, then fade into something uncertain by the end of the day. This did not fade. It stayed. The room was my real room. The desk was in the right place. The chair was in the right place. The path from the bathroom to my bedroom was familiar. The figure was in a specific spot. Even the feeling of the house being asleep seems real to me. It does not feel like a dream place. It feels like I woke up, went to pee, came back, and saw something in my room. I do not know what she was writing. That is another detail I think about. If there was really something on the chair, I have no memory of seeing it the next day. I do not remember a note, a piece of paper, or a drawing. I do not remember asking my parents whether someone had been in my room. Maybe there was nothing on the chair at all. Maybe the woman only appeared to be writing because of the way she was positioned. Maybe her hands were moving near the chair, and my tired brain interpreted it as writing. Maybe the chair held something ordinary, clothes, a book, a toy, a notebook, and my memory turned it into a place where she was making notes. But the idea of her writing is still part of the memory. She seemed focused. She seemed busy, not threatening, not watching me, not trying to make me leave. She was doing something private and quiet in my room, and I happened to walk in and see her. Sometimes I wonder whether she was writing something for me. That thought sounds strange, but it comes from the way the memory felt. She did not feel like a stranger in the usual sense. She did not feel like an intruder. She felt calm, protective, almost like someone who was supposed to be there. I do not know why. Maybe I was a child who needed comfort. Maybe I was dealing with some fear or stress that I did not fully understand, and my dreaming mind created a figure who felt safe. Children often process emotions in images. A child who is anxious may dream about a guardian, a helper, an angel, a relative, or a mysterious person who makes them feel protected. Maybe the red outline was part of that. Maybe it was a dream symbol. Maybe my mind gave her a red glow because it made her feel important or separate from the room. Or maybe it was a trick of light. A red nightlight from another room could have reflected somehow. A light from outside could have cast color through curtains. The glow from a clock radio, a toy, a power strip, or a small electronic device could have created a reddish outline around a shadow. At 8 years old, I might not have understood what I was seeing. The human brain is good at turning incomplete visual information into people. In dim rooms, shadows and furniture can become figures. A chair, clothing, curtains, and a low light source can create a shape that seems human for a moment. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe I walked back into my room half asleep, saw something near the desk, and my brain made it into a kneeling woman. Maybe the image stayed because it was strange enough to scare or confuse me. But the feeling still does not match fear. That is what makes it difficult to dismiss completely. If I had seen something that looked wrong, I would expect to remember panic. I would expect to remember screaming, running out of the room, hiding under the blankets, or waking my parents. But I do not remember any of that. I remember feeling calm. I remember feeling like the figure was not there to hurt me. That is why, even now, I do not think of it as a frightening memory. It is strange. Yes, it gives me questions I cannot answer. But it does not feel dark. It does not feel evil. It does not feel like a nightmare. It feels like something that happened in a quiet moment when I was a child. The memory has stayed with me for years because it was so different from the kinds of scary stories people usually tell. When people describe seeing something in their room at night, it is usually a shadow figure, a face, a person standing in the doorway, or something staring from the corner. There is usually fear. There is usually a sense that the person was being watched or threatened. Mine was not like that. The woman did not feel threatening. She was kneeling. She was focused on the chair. She had that strange red border. And instead of feeling afraid, I felt protected. That feeling is hard to explain to someone who was not there. It was not like I thought, "This is safe," in words. It was more like my body did not react with fear. Something about her presence made the room feel still. Maybe I was too tired to be scared. Maybe I did not fully understand what I was looking at. Maybe I only remember the feeling differently now because so much time has passed. Memories change. They become shaped by later thoughts, later stories, and the way we retell them to ourselves. A memory from when you are 8 can become more meaningful or more mysterious as you grow older. I know that. I also know that some childhood memories remain clear because of how unusual they were. You may not remember every school day or every bedtime from when you were 8, but you remember a specific moment that felt unlike anything else. You remember the room. You remember the position of objects. You remember a person-shaped figure where there should not have been one. And you remember the feeling. For me, that feeling was calm. There are times when I wonder whether I should have told someone about it the next morning. Maybe I did, and I simply do not remember. Maybe I told my parents there was a woman in my room, and they reassured me it was a dream. Maybe I told my brother, and he laughed. Maybe I tried to explain it, and then forgot the conversation because I was young. Or maybe I kept it to myself. Children do that sometimes. They see or feel something they do not understand, and because it does not seem dangerous, they do not think to mention it. They may assume it was normal. They may assume adults already know. They may think it is not important enough to talk about. I do not know. The blank after the encounter makes it impossible to be sure. Sometimes I wonder whether the woman was someone I knew who appeared in a dream. Maybe she resembled a relative, a teacher, a neighbor, or someone I had seen in a photo. Maybe my brain borrowed a face and placed it in my room, but I do not remember her face clearly enough to identify anyone. I remember the general shape, the posture, the fact that she seemed like a woman, the red outline, the feeling she gave me. That is all. I do not remember what she wore. I do not remember her hair color. I do not remember whether she looked young or old. I do not remember whether her hands were visible. I only remember that she was on her knees, writing or doing something on the chair. That is why the memory has such a strange quality. The details that should help me explain it are gone, but the details that made it feel unusual stayed. The woman, the red border, the calmness, the gap afterward. Over the years, I have tried to decide whether it was a dream, a hallucination while half asleep, a trick of light, or something else. I do not have an answer. Part of me thinks it probably was a dream or a half-awake visual experience. That is the most reasonable explanation. I was a child. It was nighttime. I had just gotten out of bed. The mind can create very vivid images when you are between sleep and waking. Part of me thinks it could have been a memory of something real that I cannot explain. Maybe there was a reason I felt protected. Maybe the figure was simply a comforting image my mind created at the exact moment I needed comfort. Maybe it was something I will never understand. I do not think I need to force an answer. Not every memory has to become proof of something. It can be what it is, a moment from childhood that felt real, stayed real in my mind, and never completely fit into any easy explanation. I still remember walking back from the bathroom. I still remember entering my room. I still remember stopping when I saw her. I still remember the red around her shape. And I still remember the calm feeling that came over me, even though I was looking at something I should not have been able to explain. Then the memory stops. Maybe I went back to bed. Maybe I called someone. Maybe I stood there longer than I remember. Maybe I woke up the next morning and the room was normal, the chair was empty, and nothing had changed. I do not know, but I remember her, not as something evil, not as something terrifying, just as a woman kneeling beside my desk chair in the middle of the night, outlined in red, quietly writing something while I stood in the doorway and felt strangely safe. Before the next story begins, thank you for staying here in the dark. If this is your first visit, subscribe to Wickless Night for more true stories made for the late hours, when the world is quiet and every little noise feels important. You can also leave a like and tell me which story has made you look around the room so far. Now, let's continue. One night, around 2 in the morning, I heard someone walking outside my bedroom window. At first, I did not understand what I was hearing. I was awake, but only barely. I had been lying in bed in that half-tired state where you are not fully asleep, but not fully alert either. The house was quiet. There was no television on, no music, no people moving around, and no normal sound coming from outside. Then I heard it, a slow, dragging footstep. It was not the quick sound of someone walking past the house. It was not a car door shutting, an animal moving through bushes, or wind pushing something against the side of the building. It sounded like footsteps, slow ones, heavy ones, and they were coming closer. I remember freezing immediately. I did not sit up. I did not reach for the light. I did not even move under the covers. I just listened. The sound continued. Drag, step, drag, step. It was slow enough that I could hear each separate movement. There was a pause between them, then another dragging step. It sounded as though someone was walking carefully, but not normally. Like one foot was being pulled along the ground before the other one moved. The sound came from outside. At least, that was how it seemed. It was getting closer to my bedroom window. My first thought was that someone was trying to break in. That was the only thing my brain could come up with at 2 a.m. I was alone in bed, the house was dark, and I could hear slow footsteps moving directly along the outside wall. I remember trying to tell myself it was probably nothing. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was a raccoon, a dog, a cat, or something else moving through the yard. Animals can make strange sounds at night, especially when you cannot see them. A large animal moving through leaves or across a porch can sound more human than you would expect. But the sound was too steady, too deliberate. It did not sound like claws. It did not sound like something rushing through the grass. It sounded like someone dragging their feet. The steps got closer and closer. I could hear them outside my bedroom window. That was when I became truly afraid. My bedroom window was close enough to the bed that I could imagine exactly where someone would be standing. I knew the layout of the outside of the house. I knew where the garden was, where the porch was, where the path went, and where someone would have to walk to pass directly beside my window. The footsteps were right there, right outside. For a few seconds, I could not move. I kept expecting to see a shadow pass across the curtains or against the glass. If someone was standing that close, I thought surely I would see some kind of shape. A head, a shoulder, a hand. The outline of a person blocking whatever small amount of light came from outside. But I never saw anything. No shadow crossed the window. No figure appeared. No face looked in. There was only the sound. Drag, step, drag, step. It continued past the window. That should have made me feel better, but it did not. Instead, it made me wonder where the person was going. The footsteps were moving along the side of the house. If they had passed my bedroom window, they were heading toward the living room. The idea that someone was walking around the outside of the house while I lay there listening made my stomach twist. I still stayed in bed for a moment. I was scared to move, but I was also scared to stay where I was. I did not know whether I should call someone, turn on lights, lock the door again, or check the windows. I was trying to think through what I would do if there really was an intruder outside. But the footsteps kept going, slowly, dragging, moving farther along the wall. Eventually, I got out of bed. I did it quietly. At least I tried to. My heart was pounding so hard that I felt like I was making more noise than I actually was. Every little thing seemed loud. The floor under my feet, the shift of the blanket, the bedroom door opening. I stepped into the hallway and listened again. The footsteps were still outside. They had reached the living room window. I could hear them passing it. That confirmed, at least in my mind, that the sound was not coming from inside the walls or above the ceiling. It seemed to be moving with the outside of the house. It had started at my bedroom window, then continued along the path toward the living room. I walked carefully toward the living room. The house felt completely different at night. During the day, it was familiar. It was a normal place. You could see every room, every corner, every doorway. The windows just looked out onto the yard. The porch door was just a door. But at 2 a.m, everything felt exposed. The windows felt like weak points. The dark glass made it impossible to see outside clearly. The hallway felt longer. The quiet felt heavier. I reached the living room and heard the dragging steps move past that window too. Again, I looked. Again, there was no shadow. That was the part that bothered me the most. If someone had been walking right outside, I should have seen something. The window was large enough that a person passing close by should have created some kind of movement. Even if it was dark outside, there should have been a shift in the darkness. A silhouette. A shape blocking the light from a street lamp, neighbor's porch light, moonlight, or anything else. But I saw nothing. The sound passed by. Then it seemed to move toward the back of the house, toward the porch door. I followed it. I do not know why I did that. Looking back, it probably would have been smarter to stay inside, lock everything, call someone, and avoid going anywhere near the door. But fear does not always make people act smart. Sometimes fear makes you need an answer immediately. I wanted to know who was outside. I wanted to know whether someone was trying to get in. I wanted to know whether it was an animal. I wanted the sound to become something ordinary. As I moved closer to the porch door, I could still hear the dragging footsteps. They were slow. They were close. By then, it felt like whoever or whatever was making the noise had reached the area just outside the porch. Then, as soon as I got to the door, the footsteps stopped. Completely, there was no final step moving away. No sound of someone crossing the grass. No sound of a gate opening. No sound of shoes moving over pavement. No sound of leaves shifting. Nothing, just silence. I stood there with my hand near the door, staring at it. I remember not wanting to open it. Everything in me said not to. If there was really someone outside, then opening the door would be the worst possible thing I could do. I was not prepared for anything. I did not know whether they had a weapon, whether they were trying to get inside, or whether they were simply standing right on the other side of the glass. But I also could not stand there forever. The silence was too strange. The footsteps had stopped directly outside the porch door. That meant whoever had been walking was close. Maybe they were waiting. Maybe they were listening. Maybe they had seen me move through the living room. Maybe they knew I was inside. The thought made me feel sick. I stayed still and listened. Nothing. I waited for another drag. Nothing. I waited for the sound of breathing, a hand on the door, a knock, anything. Nothing happened. Finally, I looked out. I only peeked. I did not throw the door open wide. I did not step outside. I tried to look through the porch door carefully, just enough to see whether someone was standing there. There was nothing. The porch was empty. The back garden looked empty. No person was standing near the door. No one was walking across the yard. No one was hiding in the grass that I could see. There was no movement at all. I looked farther out. Nothing. The yard was dark and still. The trees, bushes, grass, and fence all looked normal. There was no obvious place where someone could have vanished in the few seconds it took me to reach the door. And that was what made it so unsettling. The only way whoever had been walking could have gone was back the way they came. They would have had to walk past the living room window again, then past my bedroom window, then away from the house. But I never heard the footsteps again. Not one step, not one drag, nothing They had stopped beside the porch door and simply disappeared. I stood there staring into the yard for a while. I kept expecting to see someone appear from the side of the house. I kept expecting to hear the slow, dragging sound begin again, moving away through the darkness. But it never did. Eventually, I shut all the windows. I checked them. I made sure everything was closed properly. I think I went around the house, checking locks too, even though I was terrified of standing near the windows. I did not want to be the person who ignored a real threat. If someone had been outside, I wanted to make sure they could not get in, but I also did not want to look outside again. Every dark window felt like it could suddenly show me a face. Every small sound made me stop. The house had become too quiet after the footsteps stopped. That is something people do not always understand about fear. Sometimes silence is worse than sound. At least when you hear footsteps, you know where the danger might be. You know something is moving. You can follow the noise. But when the sound stops and there is no explanation, your mind begins filling in every possibility. Maybe the person was hiding. Maybe they had crouched down near the porch. Maybe they had walked away silently. Maybe they had gone around the other side of the house. Maybe the footsteps had never been outside at all. Maybe they had come from a pipe, a vent, an animal, or a sound traveling strangely through the walls. I tried to think of those explanations because I did not want to believe someone had been standing outside my windows. A branch could have been dragging against the house. The wind could have moved something across the side of the building. A loose piece of guttering, a garden tool, or something else outside could have created a slow scraping sound. Maybe the sound only seemed to move from window to window because of the way it echoed through the walls. That was possible. Houses can be strange at night. Temperature changes make wood shift. Pipes can make noises that sound like footsteps. A heating system can start and stop. Wind can push things against siding or windows. Sounds can travel in ways that make them seem much closer than they are. But I had lived in that house long enough to know its normal sounds. This did not sound like the house settling. It sounded like footsteps. And not ordinary footsteps. Slow, dragging ones. I called my mom. I do not even remember exactly what I said at first. I may have tried to make it sound casual, because saying, "Someone is walking around outside my house and then vanished," sounded ridiculous. But I was scared. I wanted another person to know. I wanted someone to tell me it was probably nothing. I wanted to hear a familiar voice. My mom probably tried to reassure me. She may have told me to keep the doors locked, stay inside, and not go out to investigate. She may have suggested it was an animal. She may have told me to call the police if I felt unsafe or if I heard anything else. I do not remember every word. I remember being relieved just to be talking to her. After that, I stayed awake for a long time. I kept listening. I sat in the living room or my room, checking the windows whenever I heard even the smallest sound. I did not want to go back to sleep because I was afraid I would hear the dragging footsteps again outside my bedroom window. But they never came back. No more sounds. No knocks, no broken glass, no sign of anyone trying the doors. Nothing. By morning, everything looked normal. The yard was just the yard again. The porch was empty. The grass looked untouched, from what I could see. There was no obvious clue that someone had walked close to the house in the middle of the night. I did not find anything strange outside. No dropped item, no sign that someone had been standing near the door. No explanation for where the footsteps came from. I have thought about that night many times since then. Part of me still believes it could have been a person. Maybe someone was walking through the neighborhood late at night. Maybe they passed close to the house, dragging their feet for some reason. Maybe they walked past the windows and then turned away into the yard or down another path before I reached the porch door. Maybe I simply did not hear them leave because I was moving inside the house, opening doors and listening through glass instead of standing outside. That is possible. Maybe the person moved farther away faster than I realized. Maybe they stepped onto grass, where the sound became harder to hear. Maybe the wind or the walls made their movement seem stranger than it really was. That could explain it. But then I think about the timing. The sound was moving toward the porch. I followed it, and the exact second I reached the porch door, it stopped. Not gradually, not as though someone was walking away. It stopped beside the door. Then there was nothing outside. That was the part I could never explain. I do not say it was definitely something paranormal. I do not know what it was. It may have been an animal or a person. It may have been a sound that traveled through the house in a way I misunderstood. It may have been a loose branch, a dragging object, or something outside shifting in the wind. But it was one of the most frightening things I have ever heard. Because it sounded close. It sounded like someone was making their way around the outside of my home. It sounded like they knew exactly where my room was. And when I finally reached the porch door to look, the sound stopped, as if whoever was making it knew I had come to check. Then there was only silence. I still remember the slow rhythm of it. Drag, step, drag, step, outside my bedroom window, then outside the living room, then beside the porch, and then nothing. That night I shut every window, checked every lock, and called my mom. I laughed about it afterward because sometimes that is the only way to deal with something that scared you badly. But I never forgot it. And even now, if I hear slow footsteps outside a window late at night, I think about that sound stopping right beside the porch door, without anyone there. When I was in college, I had the chance to travel through Central America with a group of students and program leaders. It was one of those trips that felt exciting from the moment it began. We were all young, away from home, trying new food, hearing a different language around us, and learning how much larger the world was than the places we were used to. Everything felt more vivid because it was unfamiliar. The streets, the weather, the buildings, the sounds at night, even the small routines of daily life, all felt different from what we knew back home. Part of the trip included spending a week in a small city in Nicaragua. Instead of staying together in a hotel, we were placed with local families in pairs. The idea was to experience everyday life more closely, not just see the country as tourists passing through. Each pair of students stayed in a different home, and during the day, we would meet up with the larger group for activities, meals, visits, and whatever had been planned. My homestay partner and I were staying with a family on the other side of town from where most of the group events happened. The arrangement itself was not a problem during the daytime. We usually traveled with the group, knew where we were going, and had leaders around us. But at night, especially after a late dinner or an evening activity, getting back to the house could be more complicated. On this particular night, the group had gone out for dinner together. It had already become late by the time the meal ended. The restaurants and streets had started to quiet down, but there were still people around. You could hear cars passing, distant conversation, music from somewhere farther down the road, and the normal nighttime sounds of a city settling into the evening. There was nothing dramatic happening. Everyone was simply beginning to split off and head back to their homestays. Some students were close enough to walk home in pairs. Others had hosts coming to pick them up. A few people had arranged rides. My partner and I did not have that option. Our homestay was too far away to walk, especially at night, and it was not a route we knew well enough to feel comfortable taking on foot. We needed a cab. That was the plan from the beginning. We stood outside with a few other members of the group while we waited for one to pass. It was late enough that there were fewer vehicles around than there had been earlier in the evening, so we had to wait a little while. I remember feeling tired, not exhausted exactly, but tired in that travel-heavy way where you have been social all day, moving from one place to another, trying to absorb everything around you. I was ready to get back to the homestay, wash up, and sleep. My partner seemed the same way. We were talking casually, probably trying to work out what time we would need to be up in the morning or laughing about something that had happened during dinner. We were not especially nervous. We knew we had to get a ride, and we were focused on getting home. Eventually, we saw a cab coming down the street. We waved. The driver slowed and pulled over. At first, it seemed like exactly what we had been waiting for. The vehicle looked like a cab. It stopped for us. We were standing in a place where we could safely get in. There was no obvious reason to hesitate. My partner and I moved toward it. I remember opening the door and beginning to climb in. Then, without warning, I felt something change. It was not a thought. It was not a clear observation. It was not the kind of concern where you look at a situation and logically decide that one detail is strange. It was a physical feeling, a deep, immediate sense that something was wrong. The feeling hit me all at once, like a drop in my stomach. I felt it in my chest and my gut at the same time. It was as though every part of me had suddenly decided, before my mind had caught up, that I should not be getting into that car. It was overwhelming. I had felt nervous before in my life. I had been in unfamiliar places. I had traveled. I had walked through cities late at night. I knew what ordinary caution felt like. This was different. It felt urgent. It felt like my body was trying to tell me to get out. I looked over at my homestay partner. She looked terrified. That was the moment that made the feeling impossible to ignore. I had not said anything yet. I had not turned to her and told her I felt uneasy. I had not pointed out anything strange about the cab. But the expression on her face looked exactly like I felt. Her eyes were wide. She had gone still. It was the kind of look you get when your brain is trying to decide whether you are in danger. For a second, we both seemed frozen. The car was right there. The door was open. We had already begun getting in. Then, from nearby, one of the other people in our group started shouting. They had been waiting close by, seeing us off before we left. They yelled at us to get out of the cab. Not casually, not as a joke. They shouted with real urgency. "Get out!" The sound cut through everything. My partner and I reacted immediately. We pulled back out of the car. I remember the motion feeling awkward and rushed. One second I was moving into the back seat, and the next I was stepping backward onto the street as quickly as I could. The other group member was still calling to us, telling us not to go. They said they had gotten a weird feeling, too. They did not know why. They could not point to a specific thing that had happened. They just knew they needed to get us out of that cab. For a few seconds, the three of us stood there, near the curb, looking at each other, all unsettled in the same way. That was when I noticed something that had felt wrong without fully registering in my mind before. There were two men in the front seats. One was driving, the other was sitting in the passenger seat. It was not necessarily impossible or proof that anything bad was happening. People ride together. Drivers have friends, relatives, co-workers, or someone they are dropping off. There could have been a completely ordinary explanation for why another man was in the front seat, but it was unusual enough to stand out. A cab had stopped for two young women who needed a ride home late at night, and both front seats were occupied by men. The back seat was available to us, but the setup felt wrong. Maybe I would have ignored it under normal circumstances. Maybe I would have told myself it was none of my business. Maybe I would have thought the driver had picked up a friend, or the passenger was just heading somewhere nearby. but I was already feeling that deep alarm in my body. My partner was feeling it too, and someone standing nearby had felt it strongly enough to yell for us to get out. At that point, we did not need more proof. We did not need to know the men's intentions. We did not need to wait for anything worse to happen. We just needed to listen to the feeling and step away. The cab did not become violent. No one jumped out. No one shouted at us. No one made a direct threat. As far as I remember, the car simply left after we got out. That was almost stranger in a way. There was no dramatic ending to explain the fear. No chase, no confrontation, no clear event that gave us certainty about why we had felt what we felt. The vehicle drove away, and we were left standing there with our hearts racing. For a while, we did not say much. We were trying to process what had just happened. The other group member kept saying that they did not know why they had felt the need to stop us. They had just looked at the cab and felt something wrong. It was not a thought-out decision. It was instinct. My partner finally told me that she had felt the exact same thing I did. The moment she started getting into the cab, she felt sick. She felt like she should not be there. She had not wanted to say it because everything was happening so fast. There was a cab waiting, we needed to get home, and she did not want to sound irrational or over-dramatic. But when I looked at her, she had already been feeling it. That was what stayed with me. It was not just my own anxiety. It was not just travel nerves. It was not that one person had gotten scared and influenced the others afterward. 3 people had reacted before any clear danger was visible. My partner and I felt it as we began getting into the car. The other group member felt it strongly enough to shout for us to get out. I have tried many times to explain what happened in a normal way. Maybe the driver's body language seemed wrong without us consciously noticing it. Maybe the second man in the front made us uncomfortable before we even had time to identify why. Maybe there was something about the way the cab stopped, the way the men looked at us, the tone of their voices, or the way the interior felt that our brains picked up on before we could put it into words. People notice more than they realize. Your mind can read facial expressions, posture, eye contact, tension, and small changes in behavior very quickly. Sometimes the body reacts to danger before the conscious mind understands what it has seen. Maybe that was what happened. Maybe the driver and passenger were perfectly harmless, but the situation looked unusual enough that all of us became uneasy at the same time. Maybe it was simply the wrong cab for us at the wrong moment in an unfamiliar city at night. Maybe the 2 men had a completely innocent reason to be together. Maybe they were waiting for another fare. Maybe the passenger was a relative. Maybe the driver was helping someone get home. Maybe there was no danger at all. I cannot say for certain. I do not know what would have happened if we had stayed in the car. That is the part that makes the story difficult. There is no answer. We did not find out whether the cab would have taken us directly to our homestay. We did not find out whether the men were legitimate. We did not find out whether the car was even a real licensed taxi. We got out before anything happened, and I am grateful for that. Sometimes you do not need to prove that a situation is dangerous before you leave it. Sometimes you do not need someone to threaten you before you decide that something does not feel right. At that age, I probably would have talked myself out of that feeling if I had been alone. I might have told myself I was overreacting. I might have thought, this is probably fine. We need to get home. I do not want to make a scene. I might have worried about embarrassing myself or inconveniencing the driver. But I was not alone. My partner felt it too. Then the group member nearby reacted, without either of us telling them what we were feeling. That gave us the permission we needed to listen to ourselves. We did not have to argue. We did not have to politely explain. We did not have to wait and see. We just got out. Afterward, we found another way home. I do not remember every detail of how that part worked. Maybe we waited for another cab. Maybe one of the leaders helped arrange something. Maybe we walked with more people until we found a safer option. What I remember most is the feeling of relief once we were no longer near that first car. My hands were shaking. My partner looked shaken too. The other group member was still serious and quiet. It was not the normal nervousness you feel after almost doing something embarrassing. It was the feeling that we had narrowly avoided a situation we did not understand. For the rest of the trip, I thought about it often. I did not become afraid of every cab or every unfamiliar person. We still had to travel. We still had to move through the city. We still had experiences that were wonderful, welcoming, and completely normal. The trip itself was meaningful. The people we met were kind. The families hosting students were generous. The city was full of life. There was nothing about Nicaragua itself that made the experience frightening. One strange moment with one cab did not define the whole place or the whole trip. But that night changed the way I thought about instinct. Before then, I had heard people say, "Trust your gut." It sounded like advice adults gave after the fact. It sounded vague. How do you know whether a gut feeling is real intuition or simple anxiety? How do you know whether you are being cautious or just imagining danger because you are in an unfamiliar place? I still do not have a perfect answer, but I know what that feeling was like. It was not a vague worry. It was not me thinking, maybe this is not the best idea. It was like something inside me was screaming that I needed to get out. I did not hear words. I did not see anything supernatural. I did not have a vision of what might happen. I just knew I did not want to be in that cab. And so did my partner. And so did the person who stopped us. I think about how quickly things can happen when you are traveling. You make decisions in seconds. You decide whether to get into a car, follow a group, take a shortcut, walk down a street, trust a stranger, or wait for someone else. Most of the time, those decisions are ordinary. You get into the cab, go home, and nothing memorable happens. But sometimes, something feels wrong. Maybe it is a detail that you cannot name. Maybe it is the number of people in the car. Maybe it is the way someone looks at you. Maybe it is the way a driver answers a question. Maybe it is just the feeling in your body before your brain is caught up. Whatever it was that night, I am glad we listened. I do not know if the men had bad intentions. I do not know if they were even aware of how strange the situation looked. I do not know if we would have arrived safely at our homestay and laughed about being scared. But I know that I did not feel safe. I know my partner did not feel safe. I know someone else saw us getting into that cab and felt an urgent need to stop us. That was enough. When I replay the moment now, I can still picture the street. The late hour, the tiredness after dinner, the small group of students beginning to head in different directions, the cab pulling over, the door opening, the two men in the front, then that sudden, crushing feeling in my stomach, the kind that makes you stop moving even when you do not know why. I remember looking at my partner and seeing that she was afraid too. Then I remember hearing someone yell for us to get out. I am so glad they did, because whatever that feeling was, instinct, unconscious observation, anxiety, luck, or something I cannot explain, it got us out of that car before we had the chance to find out whether we should have been there. And sometimes, not finding out is the best possible ending. When she was diagnosed with brain cancer, everything in the family changed almost immediately. My niece was still a child, and no one knew how to make a situation like that feel normal for her. A diagnosis like that takes over every conversation, every plan, every weekend, and every part of daily life. Adults start talking in lowered voices. Phones keep ringing. People make lists. Everyone is trying to stay calm while quietly feeling terrified. She and her mother lived in New Hampshire, but many of her appointments were at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. The drive, the appointments, the waiting rooms, and the travel back and forth were exhausting for everyone, especially for a child who was already dealing with something far too heavy for her age. Most of our family lived outside Boston, so we took turns helping when they came down for hospital appointments. Instead of making them drive all the way back home after a long day, different relatives would have them stay over for the weekend. It made the appointments easier, gave them a place to rest, and gave my niece at least some feeling of being surrounded by people who cared about her. That first weekend they stayed with me was one I never forgot. I had known my niece was scared. Anyone could see that. She was dealing with doctor visits, tests, treatment, and adults constantly talking about things they thought she could not hear. Even when people tried to be cheerful around her, children notice more than adults think they do. She also had a lot happening in her life outside of the medical situation. There were family problems that had been building for a long time. Her father was no longer around. From what I understood, he had been deported after conflict with my aunt, her grandmother. He had not been a perfect person, but the family remembered him as a loving and fun dad. He knew how to play with the kids and make them laugh, but he also knew how to be firm when discipline was needed. My niece loved him, and she blamed her mother for him not being there anymore. That was a huge wound for her, even before the cancer diagnosis. She was angry, confused, and grieving someone who was still alive but suddenly absent from her life. Children often do not have the language to explain that kind of pain. They cannot always say, "I am afraid my family is falling apart," or "I am scared that people I love can disappear." Instead, the fear comes out in nightmares, anger, tears, strange behavior, or words spoken half asleep. At the time, though, I did not fully understand how much she was carrying. I only knew that she was coming to stay at my house for the first time because of an appointment at Mass General. The evening itself was ordinary enough. We had dinner. People talked. My niece spent some time doing whatever kids do when they are trying to pass time in an adult house. There was probably television on somewhere. Maybe people were checking their phones, talking about directions for the next day, asking what time we needed to leave, and trying to act like the hospital visit was just another item on the schedule. But there was tension underneath everything. No one said it directly, but it was there. The appointment was coming. Her health was uncertain, her family life was complicated, and she was sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. I remember getting her settled for the night. I do not remember every detail of where everyone slept, but I remember thinking that I wanted her to feel safe. I wanted the house to be quiet and easy for her. I did not want her waking up afraid or feeling like she was in another temporary place because of the hospital. Eventually, the lights went out. The house became still. At first, I slept normally. Then I woke up to a scream. It was not a small cry. It was not the sound of a child calling for someone from another room. It was a full, blood-curdling scream. The kind of sound that hits you in the chest before your mind even understands what you heard. I sat straight up in bed. For a second, there was silence. That silence was almost worse than the scream. The whole house felt frozen. Then I heard my niece yelling, "Lurgate, no te quiero aku." Get out, I do not want you here. Her voice sounded terrified. Not angry in the ordinary way a child might be angry after a bad dream or an argument. It sounded like she was speaking directly to someone. Like she believed something was in the room with her, close enough that she had to tell it to leave. "Lirgate, no te quiero aku." The words came again. I remember the cold feeling that went through me. It was the middle of the night. The house was dark. There had been that scream, then that sudden silence, and then a child yelling in Spanish for someone to get out. I got up quickly. I do not remember whether I called her name first or rushed straight toward the room. I just remember moving through the hallway with my heart racing, trying to prepare myself for what I might find. A child having a nightmare is one thing. A child screaming like that in a house that is otherwise silent is something else. When I reached her, she was upset and frightened. I do not remember every word she said afterward. Sometimes when people wake from intense nightmares, especially children, the details disappear quickly. They may not know whether they were dreaming or awake. They may remember an image, a voice, or a feeling without being able to describe what happened clearly. That seemed to be the case with her. She was scared, and I tried to calm her down. I told her she was safe. I told her she was in the house with family. I may have turned on a light, checked the room, sat with her, or brought her water. I did whatever I could think of in that moment to make the fear pass. But I will never forget the sound of her voice. "Get out. I don't want you here." At the time it felt chilling in a way that is hard to explain. Not because I thought there was definitely something paranormal in the room. I did not know what had scared her. I did not see anything. I did not hear another voice. I did not find anything unusual in the house. But the way she screamed made the whole night feel wrong. There is something about hearing fear in a child's voice that changes the way a room feels. You can tell yourself it is a nightmare. You can tell yourself there is a medical explanation, an emotional explanation, or simply the fact that she was exhausted and sleeping somewhere unfamiliar. But your body still reacts. Your mind still starts asking questions. I had slept over at their house before, and I had experienced strange things there too. Nothing that I could prove. Nothing that became a clear story with an easy ending. But enough small moments that the house had always made me uneasy. They had a lot of religious items around the home. Idols, crosses, figures, and decorations on the walls. The kind of objects that are meant to bring comfort and protection. Some were family pieces. Some were important to them. Some had probably been hanging there for years, but sometimes, after a night in that house, you would wake up and find one of those things on the floor. Not every night, not all at once, just often enough to make you notice. You would walk into a room in the morning and see a religious figure that had been on the wall now lying on the floor beneath it. Or you would find something tilted, knocked down, or moved in a way that did not make immediate sense. There could have been normal reasons. Hooks can come loose, walls settle, adhesive fails. Heavy objects can slowly shift until they fall. A door closing elsewhere in the house can create a vibration. Pets can brush against furniture. Someone may have bumped something without realizing it. But when it happens enough times, people start watching. They start remembering which items were on the wall the night before. They start wondering whether there is a pattern. I had always found it creepy. Not necessarily dangerous, but unsettling. The house had a certain feeling at night. It was one of those places where you were more aware of dark hallways and quiet rooms. Even if nothing happened, you felt like something might. So when my niece screamed at my house that night, part of me immediately thought about all the weird things I had seen or heard about at their home. I remember thinking, no, please not here too. I did not want whatever strange atmosphere seemed connected to their house following them into mine. That thought was probably unfair. Looking back, I understand that there were many real-world reasons for my niece to have terrifying dreams. She was a child going through treatment for brain cancer. She was dealing with appointments, travel, medical equipment, adults whispering, uncertainty, fear, pain, and exhaustion. She was also dealing with family conflict and the loss of daily contact with her father. That alone was enough to cause nightmares. No child should have had to carry all of that. It made sense that she would wake up upset. It made sense that she would dream about someone unwanted in the room, someone she wanted to leave, someone she was afraid of. The words she yelled could have been connected to her anger toward her mother. They could have been connected to grief over her dad. They could have been connected to the stress of doctors, hospitals, and people telling her what to do. They could have been a nightmare made from every fear she had no way to express during the day. But even knowing that, the night stayed with me. It was one of the most chilling nights I had ever experienced, not because I believed with certainty that something supernatural had happened, but because the emotion in her scream was so real. There was no pretending in it, no joking, no child trying to get attention. It sounded like terror. And then she yelled, in a voice that seemed too desperate for such a quiet house, "Get out. I don't want you here." The next morning, the house looked normal again. The sunlight came through. People got ready for the day. There were things to pack, food to prepare, and an appointment waiting in Boston. The ordinary routine returned because it had to. That was one of the strange things about serious illness in a family. Even after something frightening happens, life does not pause. There are still medications. There are still appointments. There are still drives to the hospital. There are still meals to make and directions to follow. Everyone keeps moving because they have no choice. I do not remember whether my niece talked much about the nightmare the next day. She may not have remembered it clearly. She may have remembered only being scared. She may have felt embarrassed or confused. Kids often do after a nightmare, especially one that wakes other people up. They may not want to talk about it because saying it aloud makes it feel more real. I did not push her. I just tried to be kind to her. I tried to make the house feel safe. I tried not to let my own fear show too much. But I thought about it for a long time afterward. I thought about the scream. I thought about the silence after it. I thought about her yelling at someone who was not supposed to be there. Then I thought about her home, the religious items that kept ending up on the floor, and the strange, creepy feeling I had experienced during sleepovers there. It was easy to let all of that connect in my mind. Maybe too easy. Humans are built to make patterns, especially when we are afraid. A strange event in one place can make later events feel connected even when they are not. If you already believe a house feels haunted, then a child's nightmare can feel like confirmation. But grief and trauma can do that too. They can fill a house with tension. They can make everyone sleep badly. They can make ordinary sounds feel threatening. They can make adults notice every small movement because they are already on edge. And when a child is sick, every scream feels bigger. Every bad dream feels more serious. Every unexplained moment feels loaded with meaning. I do not know what my niece saw that night, if she saw anything at all. I do not know whether she was dreaming. I do not know whether she was reliving some fear from her life. I do not know whether the words were aimed at her mother, her illness, the hospital, the absence of her father, or something her sleeping mind created. I only know that she was terrified, and that was enough to scare everyone else too. The more I learned about the family situation, the sadder the story became. Her father had been gone. She felt abandoned. She blamed her mother. She had nightmares about it. Then she was diagnosed with brain cancer, and suddenly she had to deal with a kind of fear that most adults would struggle to understand. I cannot imagine what it must have felt like inside her head. People around her may have tried to protect her, but children still feel the truth of things. They know when adults are worried. They know when people are avoiding a subject. They know when something important is being hidden behind careful smiles and quiet conversations. Maybe the nightmare was just her mind trying to make sense of pain. Maybe the person she was yelling at was not a person at all. Maybe it was fear taking a shape. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was the feeling that too many things had been taken from her, and she wanted something, anything, to leave her alone. That thought makes more sense to me now than it did that night. Back then, I only felt fear. I only knew I had woken up to a scream that did not sound normal. I only knew I heard her shouting in Spanish for someone to get out. I only knew the darkness of the hallway felt different as I rushed toward her room. But years later, I think about how much she had going on. I think about the medical treatment, the hospital trips, the family conflict, the missing father, the instability, the anger, the grief, the fact that she was still a child. And I feel more sadness than fear. The strange things at their house may have had ordinary explanations. The religious objects on the walls may have fallen because of loose nails or shifting hooks. The creepy moments during sleepovers may have been shadows, unfamiliar sounds, or the uncomfortable atmosphere of a family going through difficult things. Maybe nothing supernatural was ever involved, but that one night was still real to me. The scream was real. The words were real. The fear in her voice was real. And the feeling I had afterward, that I wanted to protect her from whatever she was fighting, whether it was a nightmare, an illness, grief, or something she could not name, was real too. That is why I still remember it so clearly. Not because I can prove there was something in the room, but because, for a few seconds in the middle of the night, a scared child's voice filled the house as she shouted for something to leave her alone. And everyone who heard it understood, even without knowing the full story, that she was carrying far more than any child should have had to carry. Tonight's stories are over, but darkness has a way of making memories feel closer. Some people never forgot what they saw. Others never learned what was behind the sound, the voice, or the shape waiting just outside the light. Tell me in the comments which story you will be thinking about after this ends. Subscribe to Wickless Night for more true accounts from the hours when no one wants to be awake alone. Sleep carefully, and do not trust every shadow that stays still.